Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. In this episode of the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast, I feature New York-based artist David Shrobe. He creates multi-layered portraits and assemblage paintings made in part from everyday materials that he finds in multiple geographies and especially from around his familial home. He disassembles furniture, separating wood from fabric, and recombines them as supports for collage, painting, and drawing. Through these various modes of protection, his work brings notions of identity, history, and memory into question while challenging conventions of classical portraiture. David produces new narratives, fragmented and nonlinear, that feel intimate and personal without being anchored to a specific time or place. He holds an MFA and a BFA in painting from Hunter College and is an alumnus of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture and was a Joan Mitchell Artist Teaching Fellow. David's work is currently on view in The Slipstream, Reflection, Resilience, and Resistance in the Art of Our Time at the Brooklyn Museum, and in Lineages, works from the collection of NSU Art Museum, Fort Lauderdale. He had had several solo exhibitions at Steve Turner Gallery in Los Angeles, Thierry Goldberg Gallery, New York, and Jenkins Johnson Gallery, San Francisco. His work was included in group exhibitions at C.F. Hill Art Space in Stockholm, Jeffrey Deitch Gallery, LA, New York, the Bronx Museum, and the Studio Museum in Harlem, to name a few. He has shown at numerous art fairs and held in several permanent collections, including the Brooklyn Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Block Museum in Illinois. The Monique Meloche Gallery in Chicago is currently presenting a solo exhibition titled Riding the Wind's Back through October 30th. Please visit his website, davidshrobe.com, for his expanded bio. Please visit his exhibition, and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast and enjoy this episode. Thank you. David, I am delighted to feature you on my Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Let's start with you sharing with listeners, when did you first recognize your artistic passion?
Very early on in my childhood. My father was a jazz pianist and had a piano in our living room. And so I began with music. I wanted to play jazz like my father. And of course, I was advised I need to start with the classical music and finally work my way towards that. So began with music and then later moving into jazz dance. And then in school, art class was always my favorite subject. I had a really amazing art teacher who challenged me in many ways and really opened my eyes to the possibilities of art making. I remember maybe like 7 years old, she introduced us to the printmaking process. And right away, I was fascinated with the idea of squeezing paint through a screen using a squeegee. And I brought in one of my favorite albums at the time was Bob Marley's Legend album. And I brought it in and I used that as source material to do an initial sketch, which would then be transferred onto the screen. And the end result was so satisfying for me. It's something I kept to this day. It actually hangs in my family's home still, the kind of portrait of Bob Marley from the Legend album.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah, and then later on, I guess entering teenage years, my older sister was a major influence on my artistic practice, or even just thinking about becoming an artist. One day, she came home after going to a party with her MC leather jacket, spray painted with the words "Free South Africa" on the back, with little characters, and it mimicked the Keith Haring print of a Free South Africa painting that she had taped to her wall. And she began creating her own kind of tag style typography for every letter in the alphabet. And I was blown away. I was like, this is what I want to do. And I knew that I had to create a style of my own that was even better if I was going to be any good at it.
That's great. And did your parents have an opinion of you favoring the visual arts versus music?
No, not at all. Because I've moved around from music to dance to even tap dance at a young age. Even I remember family friends would give me gifts, art books as gifts. And I don't know, maybe they saw a glimpse of talent in me that they felt could be nurtured along the way. But I still have many of those books.
So other than your sister, what artists influenced you?
Well, I guess when getting into graffiti art, there were so many amazing, talented artists who I grew up around who kind of schooled me to what it means to be an artist and to be a good artist. And they were very, very influential just for the art I started making at that time. And then later on, I started gravitating toward artists who use the kind of graffiti sensibility in their work. Artists like Elizabeth Murray, Carol Dunham, artists like Peter Saul, Frank Stella. I remember I went to school in the Village, so Frank Stella had these massive shaped canvas constructions nearby in the lobby of a corporate office building near my school. And I remember just kind of staring in the window every time I passed it and just being totally fascinated. And then falling in love with artists who were draftsmen, like John Biggers, Charles White, and then later collage of Romare Bearden and Betty Czar, and many abstract expressionists like Motherwell de Kooning. For a while, I would paint totally abstract paintings. I wanted them to have that kind of energy that I found in de Kooning's work.
And your work now has a tendency it leans towards figurative, although it's somewhat abstract. When did you focus on more of the figurative types of creations?
It's interesting because my first real painting was around when I was 15 years old. It was I grew up with two sisters, one who was a year and a half older and one who was 10 years older. And she passed away. And after the passing of my sister, I picked up a 5x7 photograph that was laying around the house of both of my sisters. And I think at the time I might have bought some initial canvas and paint to just kind of try things out as a hobby at the time. And I began to draw and sketch from the photograph onto an unstretched piece of canvas. And initially it was a way to kind of grieve, and later became a way to celebrate and remember her. And I felt the kind of joy in painting and excitement that I hadn't felt before. And it was so satisfying. I knew right away when the piece was finished, and I could see both of them in the work. And this is a piece that I also held to today, which is still very special for me. Yeah. And that was kind of one of the first figurative works that, in a way, could even relate to the work that I make today.
Sorry to hear of that loss. Would you say that those memories are reflected in most of your work?
Yeah. A lot of the portraits that you see in in a lot of the works. Sometimes I call them portraits, but they're really not. They're using a kind of language and mode of portraiture, but they exist kind of outside of that. And in the process of painting them, family members start to appear in these characters. I often don't know how the works will end up. I might start with an idea or draw from a family photograph, and they begin to morph into other characters, into other identities that often resemble family members. Sometimes my sister, sometimes my daughter, my wife. So I see those memories, and then even drawing from oral histories and stories that have kind of been handed down through generations of my family. Those all kind of reappear and become reimagined in different ways, and in the kind of imagined and real spaces that evolve in the work.
And your work includes found objects. Can you explain to listeners how you incorporate them with your paintings?
Yeah. Found objects for me sparked possibilities in painting. Became a way to kind of push my painting language into a more sculptural and physical realm. And my studio is housed in an apartment that the apartment my mother was raised in with my grandmother and great grandmother. And this was the apartment my family settled in after moving from Alabama and Arkansas and really escaping oppressive areas in the South and traveling to Harlem through the Great Migration. And so the studio space has is a kind of sacred space for me. And at times I feel that I'm tapping into a kind of ancestral lineage. Sometimes even feel like the ancestors guide me in ways, the littlest things. I leave a lot of scraps around in the studio, things I forget about. And at the oddest moments, they appear to me. But mostly furniture parts. I find often right in front of the studio space or on the block of my studio, the most amazing pieces of furniture, headboards, basketball backboards, pieces of the mirror frames that often then become ways to frame my subjects and also contribute to the kind of overall form or work might take. But really, it becomes about a kind of playful discovery. That's how I think about my practice is really it's all about play and the things I find, I bring them into the studio, I clean them up, I let them sit out, and then it becomes about responding to the things I find and manipulating them, letting a kind of transformation happen over time that takes me to places I couldn't expect or didn't think of from initially the items I find.
It's fascinating. And when do the titles enter the creative process?
It's always different. Sometimes they can come with an initial idea, and I might write the title down, and then later on, as the pieces always change and they go through many shifts and many different stages. Sometimes titles come about from poems I might hear, talks, lectures, lines from a book. And it's almost like, I hear about writers, like the idea of grabbing a word or something out of the air. And so I often feel that's like grabbing a word out of the air and I have to write it down quickly before I forget it, before it leaves my mind. At other times, sometimes they come at the very end of a work when a work is just completed and kind of act as a punchline for the kind of things going on or the formal elements of a work. But they're super important for me. They can also contribute to the kind of overall experience of a work.
Interesting. And how would you define Black art?
When I think about Black art, right away what comes to mind is the Black arts movement. Amiri Baraka, the many amazing poets, felt like more of a literary movement that also was in relation to the Black Power movement. But I also think about Black art now as kind of work that exists and stands in solidarity with a kind of quest for Black equality. I think it's work that speaks to liberation, revolution, affirmation, self-determination, a sense of pride. I also think Black art is art that is made by people who identify throughout the diaspora of being Black or African.
I like your answer.
Thank you.
And, when you're creating, do you think about who your audience is?
No, not really. I think I'm often too engulfed in the practice, in the making, to think about anything else really. I'm too engaged in kind of thinking about composition, thinking about the color relationships, thinking about ways to take chances in the studio that often become surprises and becomes about kind of figuring things out in the work and then figuring things out with myself. Every work in a way presents a kind of learning experience, a growth experience that sometimes I pick up clues from that I later on put into a work. Other times I totally forget about them and they are abandoned.
And do you think your audience understands your work? At
times I do. There's times where somebody might see my work and say something. I remember like somebody said something about the found objects I use is empowering the kind of images and objects that are present in our communities. And right away I was like, okay, this person gets it. I think they might have even been from the neighborhood that I find the material. Other times I've heard somebody say this feels like Harlem, so that's interesting, like thinking about the things that I pick up in the Harlem neighborhood that speak to history, speak to Harlem's rich history and environment.
What do you feel is the purpose of art?
To feed our soul, to make us think. Art has a way of changing perceptions, changing people's minds. I think it's too the kind of total expression of freedom.
How do you keep learning?
Always learning. I have a 5-year-old daughter, so
that helps.
I learned through, I learned through teaching her. When I was a teacher of young children, I felt like sometimes I'm learning more from them than they am from me at times. It becomes a kind of sharing experience. And as I said, with every new work, even from its initial start, it's always full of surprises, full of discoveries. And it becomes about following the work where it takes me. And that what keeps me excited, keeps me engaged, keeps me moving, and it becomes a dance. I think of it as a dance and a kind of marriage of materials when everything is really working. It's so satisfying, and that kind of marriage, I think, makes the image poetic in a way.
Interesting. And how did COVID impact your practice?
In many ways. Having a daughter and being married, we've been in somewhat in isolation for part of the time. But being an artist is we're used to isolation. I spend so much time in the studio by myself. So, but there are many stresses that the virus has caused. Stresses in our health and relationships with partners and friends. Feelings of anxiety and fear, anger and frustration, especially even in heightened police killings and social uprisings, dealing with white supremacy, all the things that were happening that coincided with this kind of, with COVID, with this collective experience that we're all kind of in at the same moment. But I think a lot of those frustrations, a lot of that anxiety, it has to be channeled. It has to be let out. And so for me, I channel that in the work, and it becomes a way about responding to the social realities, all the things going around us. and thinking about ways to make meaningful work that speaks to the time that we're living in.
And what are you excited about now?
Well, this week I would say the joy of seeing my 5-year-old daughter Luna. She has just started kindergarten this week, and after almost a year of remote learning and isolation, she has a chance now to make new friends, to go back to school. Even though they're wearing a mask, it doesn't set her back. She's loving school. She's so excited. Also, I just finished a new body of work that I will be presenting at Monique Maloche Gallery in Chicago, and very excited to share this new body of work with the public. I began it almost a year ago. I began it in the height of the pandemic in 2020. And my work takes a really long time to make. And so even there's times where I might feel the work is finished, but I need it to sit with me for another month or so. And sometimes just to look during that time, I might move on to another piece. But I spend a lot of time looking at the works that might be in that finished stage, and then contemplate a next move, or think about how it could be pushed a little more before I let it out into the world. And they're my babies in a way. So they're finally leaving the studio and headed out into the world. In my studio, I have these very old stucco walls. So it changes the feel. It shifts and changes when in the space, from one space to another. And so moving into a kind of pristine gallery space, the work will change in other ways. And some of the works I haven't seen hung yet myself. So I will be traveling to Chicago tomorrow, and I will be seeing a lot of the works in the gallery space for the first time. So I'm excited to see the works, and I hope that it can connect with people.
I'm sure they will. And Luna is a beautiful name.
Thank you.
Good choice there.
She appears in a lot of works, whether it's a piece, it's her ear or her eye, or a silhouette of a baby you might see. So you might find some of that in there.
And given that, and given the history and your space and life in general, how do you feel when you start the process? Like when you approach a canvas, what overcomes you?
When I'm approaching a new work, I really approach it with excitement, with slowness, with finesse, with care. I'm being very, very hands-on. I don't work with assistants very much, and so I like to do everything myself. So I have to be very careful with the initial moves of a work, but it's very exhilarating to step into a new piece, especially when a new idea or a vision comes out of is in my head that I feel that needs to manifest into a work. There were even times that works would come out of dreams. I would dream about me being in a museum or gallery space, and then when I would wake up, I would realize that I wasn't dreaming about somebody else's work, but that these were potential works that could be made.
Love it. This has been a great interview. I really appreciate it. And this will be our last question. And that is, what do you feel is your role as an artist?
To connect with people, to share my vision, to create a legacy for my family, to give back when I can, and to come from a sincere place. It has to be meaningful for me. And I want to create meaningful work that speaks to the legacy of art, that can leave an impact on the discipline of visual art. And for me, the legacy of painting, which is my focus of interest, and to uplift community. I think about the work as offering new possibilities of freedom and empowerment.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, David. I appreciate your time. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.